courtroom was packed, murmurs rippling through the crowd as the trial was about to begin. The cold fluorescent lights reflected off the polished wooden benches, creating an atmosphere that was both solemn and tense. Seated high on the bench, Judge Albert Wilson surveyed the room with a sharp, scrutinizing gaze, an embodiment of the strictness that had earned him his formidable reputation in the legal world. No one in the room dared to breathe too loudly. Everyone knew he was a no-nonsense judge, ready to reprimand anyone who dared to challenge the authority of the law. Suddenly, the heavy doors of the courtroom creaked open and immediately all whispers ceased. Peter Smith stepped inside, gripping a worn-out briefcase tightly in one hand. The oversized blazer draped over his shoulders made him look out of place among the powerful figures in the room. His sneakers squeaked softly against the wooden floor as he made his way toward the defense table, each step heavy yet unwavering. Curious yet condescending glances followed him. Some spectators scoffed, while others shook their heads in disbelief. How could a 17-year-old boy possibly believe he could stand and argue in an actual courtroom? Across the room, Attorney Bellamy Brown, a middle-aged man in an expensive suit with an air of absolute confidence, leaned back in his chair, smirking with disdain. With over 2 decades of litigation experience, he had never encountered a case more ridiculous than this. Did this boy truly believe he could win a trial? Even Judge Wilson couldn't hide his amusement. Adjusting his glasses, he cleared his throat and looked down at Peter, speaking slowly. "Are you sure, son? This isn't a basketball court." A few chuckles echoed through the courtroom. Some in the crowd nodded in agreement, while Bellamy Brown let out a loud laugh, lightly tapping the stack of documents on his desk, as if he were watching a spectacle unfold. But Peter didn't waver. He stood tall, clenching his fists, his eyes unwavering as he met the judge's gaze and responded, his voice firm and resolute. "No, Your Honor. I'm here to defend my mother." Silence fell over the room. The smirks disappeared, replaced by expressions of surprise. For a moment, even Judge Wilson paused, his once amused eyes turning sharper, more calculating. A 17-year-old boy standing in court, not as a defendant, but as a defender of justice? But Peter knew this battle had only just begun. Peter Smith never imagined that his life could change in just one fateful afternoon. He lived with his mother, Andrea Smith, in a small, warm-down house that, despite its flaws, was filled with love. The paint on the walls had started to peel, and the roof occasionally leaked when it rained, but it was their home, the only one they had. Andrea had worked tirelessly for over 20 years to keep it, but then, one day, everything fell apart. That afternoon, Andrea returned home after another exhausting shift at the cleaning company. Her calloused hands were still damp with sweat as she stopped at the front door, rummaging through her purse for her keys. But before she could unlock the door, her eyes caught sight of a folded piece of paper wedged beneath it. As she unfolded the document, her face went pale. It was an eviction notice, demanding that they vacate the property within 7 days. Andrea stumbled, gripping the doorframe for support, her heart pounding as she read the starkly printed words. But that couldn't be right. Andrea knew she had paid every cent. She stepped inside, her voice trembling as she called out to her son. Peter was sitting at the kitchen table, focused on his math homework. But the moment he saw his mother's pale face and the paper in her shaking hands, he shot up, taking the notice and reading through it carefully. "Mom, something's wrong here." His voice dropped to a low, serious tone, suspicion flashing in his eyes. Andrea sank into a chair, her hands trembling as she clasped them together. "You don't understand, Peter. They always find a way to push people like us out. People like us, we never get the chance to fight back." Peter felt a surge of anger, but more than that, a crushing sense of helplessness. He had watched his mother work tirelessly from dawn until night just to make sure their rent was paid on time. How could they be getting evicted? His grip tightened around the paper. "Mom, I'm going to find out what's really going on." That night, Peter dedicated himself to investigating the eviction. He dug through drawers and cabinets, pulling out every rent receipt Andrea had meticulously saved. Every month she had paid in full. But when Peter compared the receipts to the eviction notice, something didn't add up. The amount owed on the notice didn't match reality. He turned to his laptop, scrolling through tenant rights laws and researching rental agreements. The deeper he dug, the more certain he became something was off. Then he found it. A shocking revelation. By law, an eviction notice was only legally valid if signed by a certified notary public. Peter picked up the notice again, eyes locked onto the signature at the bottom. The name looked familiar. He quickly searched the state's notary public database. Minutes later, his heart dropped. The notary who had signed the eviction notice had retired 2 years ago. "It's a fraud," Peter whispered. "They scammed us." The next morning, Peter showed his findings to his mother. Andrea looked at him with doubt, but when she saw the undeniable proof, her face fell. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice cracking. Peter didn't hesitate. "We're going to sue them." Andrea gasped. "Are you crazy? We don't have money for a lawyer." Peter lifted his chin, determination hardening his gaze. "Then I'll be the lawyer." But what they didn't know was that from the moment Peter started digging into the case, someone had taken notice of him. That afternoon, as Peter left school, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. The tinted window rolled down, revealing Bellamy Brown, the landlord's attorney. He adjusted his tie, a false smile curling his lips as he approached Peter. "I hear you've been very interested in your mother's case," Bellamy said, his tone dripping with mockery. "It's best if you stay out of things you don't understand." Peter clenched his fists. "Mr. Brown, this is my home. If I don't fight for it, who will?" Bellamy chuckled, his cold gaze locking onto Peter's. "Oh, then I hope you can handle pressure, kid, because I guarantee you, courtrooms aren't playgrounds for children." Peter wasn't afraid. He knew Bellamy was trying to intimidate him, but all it did was strengthen his resolve. That night, Peter sat at the kitchen table, a towering stack of law books spread before him. Across the room, Andrea watched in silent worry. But this time, she didn't try to stop him. Peter had made his decision. He would fight. And this time, he wouldn't let anyone take their home away from them. Time was not on Peter Smith's side. With only a few days left before the trial that would decide the fate of their home, he knew he had to act fast. While other kids were finishing homework or making weekend plans, Peter was buried in legal documents, trying to learn as much as possible in the shortest time. From that night on, the small kitchen table became his makeshift study desk. Surrounding him were stacks of law books borrowed from the library, printed documents from the internet, and pages filled with his messy handwriting. Andrea Smith, Peter's mother, often stood in the doorway, watching her son as he pored over his research. She was worried. Not just about the case, but about the enormous pressure Peter was putting on himself. But she knew he couldn't stop now. "Peter, you need to get some sleep," Andrea said softly one late night, seeing her son slumped over the table. Peter lifted his head, his eyes dark with exhaustion, but his resolve remained firm. "Mom, I can't. If I sleep, who will protect us?" Andrea had no response. She knew her son was right. Peter understood that in order to win, he needed undeniable proof. He began meticulously examining every small detail in the paperwork and state housing laws. One evening, while reviewing the documents again, something caught his attention. By law, an eviction notice must be notarized by a certified notary public. Peter stared at the eviction notice pinned to the wall. Something about the notary's name felt off. His instincts kicked in, and he immediately searched online. What he found shocked him. The notary public who signed the eviction notice had retired 2 years ago. His heartbeat pounded as he quickly jotted down notes. This was proof of fraud. But he knew that one piece of evidence wasn't enough. He needed to build an airtight argument. Determined, Peter set up a mock courtroom in the living room. He stood in front of the mirror, practicing his defense, playing the roles of judge, opposing lawyer, and witness, all by himself. He carefully wrote down every potential argument Bellamy Brown might use against him and prepared counter-arguments. One night, Andrea walked in and saw Peter pointing at an empty chair, pretending to argue in court. She let out a small chuckle, but her eyes glistened with tears. Peter wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for their family. As the court date approached, Peter received an anonymous message. "Give up, kid. You can't win." His stomach twisted. Someone didn't want him to continue. That night, as he walked home, he noticed a black car parked nearby. A shadowy figure sat inside, watching him. Peter swallowed hard, his fists clenching. But instead of fear, determination burned inside him. If they were scared enough to threaten him, it meant he was on the right track. On the night before the trial, Andrea brought Peter a cup of hot tea. "No matter what happens, I am so proud of you," she said, her voice trembling. Peter squeezed his mother's hand, his eyes burning with determination. "Tomorrow, I'll fight with everything I have." The fateful morning had arrived. Peter Smith slipped into his oversized blazer, gripping his worn-out briefcase tightly. His heart pounded in his chest as he stood before the county courthouse, the place that would determine the fate of his home and his mother's future. As he stepped inside, all eyes turned to him, some filled with skepticism, others with outright disdain. A 17-year-old defending himself in court? Bellamy Brown, the plaintiff's attorney, smirked, while Judge Albert Wilson, known for his strictness, watched Peter with a cold, unreadable gaze. Peter swallowed hard, then made his way to the defense table. He glanced back at his mother, Andrea Smith, who sat in the back row, her eyes a mixture of worry and pride. Taking a deep breath, Peter steadied himself. He couldn't back down now. "This court is now in session to hear the case of Richard Jones versus Andrea Smith," Judge Wilson announced. All attention shifted to Peter. Bellamy Brown was the first to stand, his voice full of confidence. "Your Honor, this is a straightforward case. The defendant has failed to pay rent for 2 months, making the eviction completely legal." He shrugged, then turned to Peter with a condescending smile. "I don't believe we need to waste much time on this matter." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Everyone was waiting to see how this untrained teenager would respond. Peter rose, adjusted his blazer, and stepped into the center of the room, his eyes locked onto Judge Albert Wilson's. "Your Honor, I do not deny that my mother was late on payments. But today's issue is not about money. It is about the legality of the eviction." The courtroom fell completely silent. Bellamy Brown scoffed. "Oh, so a kid who learned the law off the internet thinks he can argue with a lawyer with 20 years of experience?" Laughter rippled through the courtroom, but Peter remained calm. He stepped to the evidence table, lifted the eviction notice, and held it up for the court to see. "Your Honor, this eviction notice is not legal." Judge Wilson narrowed his eyes. "Explain." Peter stepped forward, his voice clear and firm. "According to state law, all eviction notices must be notarized by a valid, practicing notary public. However, the person who signed this notice, George Hamilton, retired 2 years ago." A wave of whispers rippled through the courtroom. For a split second, Bellamy froze. He snatched the document from his assistant, scanning the signature. Beads of sweat began to form on his forehead. Peter smirked slightly. He had found the weak spot, but Bellamy Brown was no amateur. He quickly shifted tactics, his tone sharper now. "Your Honor, even if there was a clerical error, it does not change the fact that the defendant failed to pay rent. A minor technicality cannot override the fundamental legal process." He turned to Peter, a mocking grin on his face. "Kid, do you really think one wrong signature is enough to win this case?" Peter didn't flinch. He took his time, flipping through his notes, then turned to the judge. "Your Honor, according to State Law 3-4, an eviction notice that contains a forged or invalid signature is completely null and void." He paused for emphasis, then continued, "That means, legally speaking, my mother was never actually evicted. Any attempt to remove us from our home was a violation of the law." The room fell deathly silent. Bellamy's face paled. He flipped through his documents frantically, searching for a counterargument. But Peter had already won the upper hand. "Furthermore," Peter added, his voice unwavering, "we did pay last month's rent. The landlord refused to accept it, deliberately forcing us into eviction." He pulled out a receipt, holding it high. Judge Wilson leaned forward, motioning for his clerk to take the document. As he reviewed it, his eyes lit up with interest. Bellamy's confidence shattered. Finally, the judge set the document down and fixed his gaze on Peter. "Kid, you've done your homework." A small, victorious smile played on Peter's lips. The sharp bang of Judge Albert Wilson's gavel echoed through the courtroom, signaling the official conclusion of the trial. For a brief moment, the entire room stood still in stunned silence. Then, all at once, it erupted with murmurs, whispers, and exchanged glances of shock and admiration. A 17-year-old boy with no legal background had just defeated a seasoned attorney and successfully saved his home. Peter Smith let out a deep, relieved breath, his shoulders finally relaxing as the weight of the battle lifted. He turned toward his mother, Andrea Smith, who sat in the gallery, tears welling in her eyes. She couldn't believe what had just happened. The little boy she had always protected had now stood up to protect her. Andrea rushed forward, pulling Peter into a tight embrace, as if letting go would make this miraculous victory disappear. "I'm so proud of you, Peter. There are no words to describe how happy I am right now." Peter smiled, wrapping his arms around his mother, feeling the warmth of her love and the overwhelming joy of triumph. On the other side of the courtroom, Bellamy Brown, the once arrogant and overconfident lawyer, stood frozen. His expression was stiff, his hands clenched at his sides. He didn't say a word. He simply gathered his papers in silence. For the first time in his career, he had been defeated by a teenager. Yet, buried beneath his bruised ego, there was a reluctant respect that he could not deny. Judge Wilson stepped down from the bench, walking toward Peter with slow, measured steps. "Young man," he said, his voice calm but laced with genuine respect, "I misjudged you, but today you've taught me something important. Justice has no age, no status. It belongs to those who fight for the truth with courage." The judge extended his hand and Peter shook it firmly, feeling, for the first time, true recognition from someone who had once doubted him. Then, with curiosity in his eyes, Judge Wilson asked, "Have you ever thought about becoming a lawyer?" Peter took a deep breath, his gaze drifting toward the courthouse windows, where the sunlight streamed through, golden and warm. He had never considered it before, but after everything he had been through, he knew he had found his life's purpose. Turning back to his mother, then to the judge, Peter's eyes burned with determination. "I'll be back, Your Honor, but next time I won't be standing here as a defendant. I'll be standing here as an attorney, one who fights for justice for people like my mother." Andrea beamed with pride, gripping her son's hand tightly. As mother and son stepped out of the courthouse, they walked toward a new future. One where Peter Smith was no longer just a boy fighting for his home, but a warrior for justice, ready to change lives. The story of Peter Smith is not just a legal battle. It is a symbol of perseverance, resilience, and unwavering determination in the face of adversity. It proves that truth and justice can prevail, even when facing a seemingly invincible system of power. Before the trial, Peter was just a 17-year-old boy with no legal background. But instead of accepting his fate, he chose to stand up and fight. Not only for himself, but for his mother, a woman who had sacrificed everything to protect their home. The story shows that anyone can be a defender of justice as long as they have the courage and determination to pursue the truth to the very end. Through Peter's journey, the story delivers a powerful message. Justice does not belong to the powerful. It belongs to those who are willing to fight for what is right. A boy with no resources, no experience, and no formal training was able to defeat a seasoned lawyer, not through strength, but through intelligence, perseverance, and an unbreakable spirit. Furthermore, the story highlights a harsh reality in society. Injustice is not always obvious. Sometimes it hides in the fine print of contracts, in the way systems are designed to push out the vulnerable, or in how those in power look down on the weak. The silence of those who suffer allows these injustices to continue unchecked. But Peter refused to stay silent. He proved that one voice can make a difference, that courage can break down barriers that seem impossible to overcome. And most importantly, victory is not the end. It is the beginning of a greater mission. When Peter walked out of the courtroom, he didn't just save his home. He made a statement that he would return not as a defendant, but as a lawyer. That is the most powerful message of this story. Every challenge, every injustice, is just a test leading us to discover our true purpose. Peter's story is a source of inspiration for anyone who has ever faced injustice, reminding us that you don't need power to seek justice. You just need the determination to fight for it. The story of Peter Smith is not just a legal battle, but a symbol of perseverance, courage, and relentless determination. It conveys a powerful message. Justice does not belong to the powerful. It belongs to those who have the courage to fight for what is right. Peter is a 17-year-old boy with no legal background. He has no money to hire a lawyer, no experience in court, and no powerful allies. However, what sets him apart is his determination. He refuses to accept his fate, does not let fear control him, and does not back down from challenges. The story demonstrates that anyone, no matter how small, can make a difference if they have enough perseverance and resolve. In society, justice is often influenced by status, power, and influence. However, Peter proves that justice does not discriminate based on age or position. A teenage boy can defeat a veteran lawyer using intelligence, knowledge, and an unshakable spirit. This emphasizes that truth always holds value as long as someone is willing to stand up and defend it. The story also reflects a harsh reality. The vulnerable in society are often the ones who suffer the most from oppression and exploitation. Andrea Smith, Peter's mother, is a hard-working woman who does everything to support her family, yet she is pushed to the brink of despair by those who abuse their power. However, Peter refuses to surrender and is determined to uncover the truth. The message here is clear. When facing injustice, you can either accept it or stand up and fight. Peter does not win through physical strength or powerful connections. He wins through knowledge. He spends countless nights studying the law, analyzing documents, and training himself to become a defender of justice. This reinforces the idea that knowledge is the most powerful weapon anyone can use to change their destiny. When Peter walks out of the courtroom, he does not just save his home. He discovers his life's mission, to become a lawyer and fight for the defenseless. This story reminds us that every challenge is not the end, but an opportunity to unlock our true potential and build a better future.